Thanks to all of our partners like ASUS, NVIDIA, and of course all of the schools who participated in the making of this video. Well everybody, I just want to start this video by giving you a little bit of a history as to where this started. So a couple of months ago, my cousin, who's actually going to be starting in engineering in McGill here in Montreal, he came to me and he said, look, what kind of laptop should I buy? And to be honest with you, even though we have done thousands and thousands of benchmarks, I actually didn't know what to recommend to him. What did he need for especially a graphics card? Now, these sort of STEM programs have been popping up all over the place. In addition to that, they have almost the same requirements as a lot of creative programs like videographers, photographers, and whatnot. So that got me into thinking, is there a way that we could sort of tailor some testing here at Hardware Canucks in order to appeal to those students and sort of help them determine what would be good enough for their needs? Well, instead of just assuming a bunch of stuff, we embarked on a long-term project. We reached out to hundreds of students in STEM and creative fields from 3 different colleges and universities about what they used during their studies, and more importantly, what they wished they had for their courses if they could simply go back in time and rethink their initial choice. And then we took all of that data and we distilled it down into feedback for some real world testing that I personally hope will help sort of chart a course into the right buying decision, or maybe even no buying decision whatsoever if you have a relatively modern device and you feel that it will still fit your needs after all these tests that we're going to be showing. The other thing that I want to make sure of here is that we're not guiding people into either overbuying or underbuying. But let's set the stage here with some of their feedback. Very few who had their own systems used a multi-system setup, and even fewer relied exclusively on a desktop. The laptop was used for literally everything. While most had iPhones, MacBooks actually made up a slim minority of laptops, likely because many STEM apps tend to work best on Windows, not to mention many schools recommend a Windows-based machine. On the other hand, creative types we polled did tend to use more Apple devices on average, but Windows laptops, they still won out. On the other hand, we can't forget that some students also use computer labs provided by their schools, and yet the vast majority were using devices provided by their schools because their own laptops didn't meet their needs. But if given the choice, they would have much preferred to have a personal computer and avoid having to use school resources altogether. And when asked why that was the reason, the majority said that transferring data and their workflow progress between systems was a major hassle. The ability to start and finish a project on a single device is critical. Finally, the importance of a good GPU in this whole equation just can't be understated. But keep in mind, the vast majority of folks in these programs are very tech savvy. They're also taking specific course loads that are made up of programs which largely favor GPU acceleration. Meanwhile, if you're in something like social sciences, law, and many other education fields, your needs will likely be completely different. So that sets the stage for testing. And before going into this, I knew I was in for a challenge because I had some preset requirements for the laptop that I was actually looking at for this comparison. First of all, it needed to have multiple GPU options so we could have sort of like that apples to apples comparison within an identical chassis. That means every single GPU can be compared to the one above and below it in a proper manner. It also needed to have a very good IGP option, and that again is for comparison purposes. We wanted to see how a good integrated graphics chip performed against entry-level discrete GPU options. And finally, because this is a student-focused video, it needed to be relatively thin, relatively light, and it could not be a sort of flashy, in-your-face gaming first laptop. And I think you know where I'm going with this. I settled on the ROG Zephyrus G14, and I have to thank ASUS and NVIDIA for helping out with this video. Not only did they help sort of opening the door with some of these institutions, but they also helped me accomplish an almost impossible task. Get every level of G14 with every single GPU it offered. The other critical thing I wanted to do is make sure there was something here for almost every budget, from the entry-level G14 with an RTX 5050 all the way up to the RTX 5080 version. We're also showing how a top-shelf integrated graphics setup would perform in something like a thin and light ultra-portable laptop. To do that, the G14's HX370 is being run with the discrete GPU disabled and the Radeon 890M IGP being on. You'll also notice there's no 5090 here, and that's for a few reasons. Look, first of all, the G14 simply doesn't come with one this generation, and I wanted to focus on models that didn't push pricing well beyond the means of most students, despite that GPU being hugely capable for a lot of the programs we're testing here. And if you're looking for something more affordable, we're finally starting to see RTX 5000 series laptops head below the $900 mark in the US, though you have to take into account none of them are as portable as the G14 we're using in this video. And yes, I might actually do a follow-up video to this one if there's enough demand with laptops that support the 5090, maybe the Zephyrus G14 or Blade 16, but for today, that's not in the cards. What I did also do is I asked the students what are some of their most used programs within their course loads, and that was another interesting response that we got. But to many, I don't think this is gonna come as a surprise considering the professions we're focused on here. Though I might have made one mistake here. I lumped AutoDesk's entire suite of programs into a single option. But look, past that, there is one big call out here. I really didn't expect to see AI training so high on this list, at least not yet. No, this is not using a simple local chatbot or ChatGPT. This is students learning how to train and utilize local models. So with all of that, we set out to evolve our testing and the programs that we used to be a lot more relevant to the people who are watching this specific video. But I will be honest with you here. While I think that we accomplished that in most respects, we have expanded our testing by an order of magnitude into fields that we didn't even think that we were going to go into. But I think we need a little bit more help here. I think we need a little bit more guidance because we've received some additional feedback from the field and we've talked to a few more people. And I think that there's some programs that can be added, some testing methodologies that could be revised a little bit. And if you guys have any comments yourselves, please put them down below because, like I said, we're always evolving this testing. So anyways, I think the first stop that we have to get into here is some creator workloads. And for folks who use Resolve and Premiere in GPU focused rendering, investing in an even entry level option like the RTX 5050 can pay massive dividends over an IGP setup. Even a good one like the 890M in AMD's Ryzen AI 9 HX370. Past that, there's two big rendering speed increases here. One with the RTX 5070 Ti becoming sort of like a sweet spot in both NLEs, and the other sees the RTX 5080 surge ahead in Resolve. That's mostly because all of the other GPUs here have a single NVENC engine, while the RTX 5080 has two of them. And one thing that I personally feel that's really lacking in a lot of these video editing benchmarks is simple timeline playback performance, at least on video projects that are relatively layer heavy. You can go from great video rendering outputs to an absolutely terrible user experience just trying to manipulate things in your timeline. So let's start out with the most obvious comparison. The integrated graphics with 16 gigs, half of the system's memory dedicated to it against the RTX 5050. And the difference is like night and day, with the IGP becoming a literal slideshow, while the 5050 is a lot more responsive. When we compare that to the 5060, there isn't much difference, with skipped frames popping up from time to time, and even the 5070 didn't offer much of an improvement. That's simply because in this instance, video playback performance is tied to video memory, and all these have just 8 gigs. But step up to the RTX 5070 Ti and 5080, and now we're seeing another leap forward in terms of how fluid the playback is. Moving on to 3D modeling, and the IGP is simply a dead end with the scenes we use. To give you some idea, anything over 20 frames per second is completely usable in this scenario, and because of limited VRAM, the 5050, 5060, and 5070 just fail to achieve even that. Render output times in Blender and Maya again favor those higher end GPUs, but the playing field is a lot more level since we're not in a memory limited scenario here. So even the RTX 5050 gets pretty respectable numbers. Meanwhile, viewport manipulation in programs like AutoCAD and 3ds Max is a pretty lightweight task, at least with the simple shaded models we're using here. But we're using those because I wanted a more realistic idea of what modeling performance looks like before things like materials, lighting, and textures are applied. Anyways, even an IGP can handle this without any problem whatsoever, but the experience will be noticeably better with a dedicated GPU as the models get even more complex. Our MATLAB test also shows pretty linear scaling right across the board, but since the function we're using only supports CUDA for GPU acceleration, I added the HX370 CPU here as a frame of reference. And honestly, if the project you're running in MATLAB supports one of the more than 1,000 pre-built GPU accelerated functions, this could be a game changer. Now, I wanted to pause here just for a second and discuss two things that we benchmarked: Unity and Unreal engines. Now, almost everybody knows that these engines are being used in literally half or 3/4 of the PC games that are being launched these days. But what you might not know is that they are seeing an incredible attachment rate in other fields too, like automotive, healthcare, topography. Movie studios are starting to use them more and more just for visualizing effects. And because of the broad application here for these, finding a one-size-fits-all benchmark is literally impossible. Anyways, we ended up taking two relatively common situations: a complex character model in Unity and a desert canyon scene in Unreal. Performance is measured via the viewport in average frames per second. And like with a lot of these other tests, the IGP is just a non-starter here. And even with discrete GPUs, you're going to want a 5070 or above if you're using either of these engines on a regular basis. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is localized AI, starting with pretty basic 8B and 14B models, and the results show some very interesting trends. For 8B, pretty much every single GPU, including the IGP, put down some good numbers. But once VRAM gets used up and the training needs to bounce between local system memory and graphics memory, the 8 gig cards have a complete crash out. Even the IGP stays ahead since we sort of stacked the deck in its favor by dedicating 16 gigs of system memory to it. I should also mention that within LM Studio, there are ways to offload some layers directly to the CPU when the model doesn't completely fit in GPU memory. NVIDIA goes over this workaround in a blog post I'll link below, and supposedly this can provide a pretty big speed up over the way we're handling things in this test. For the time being though, this is outside our methodology, so it wasn't added to the numbers that you saw. And I think I have to be perfectly transparent here, guys. We're not even scratching the surface of localized AI. Some students we've talked to find huge benefits in running custom LLMs, while others are training their own models. So in the future, we're going to be adding a lot more tests to the AI field. And if you have anything you'd like to contribute, please reach out directly to us or put a comment down below. So that covers all of the school curriculum things I wanted to touch on in this video. And I know a lot of you, you're screaming at your screens right now. You're saying, Mike, where is the game testing? Well, these are technically gaming laptops. Why aren't you touching on that at all? Well, I will, but I also put that exact same question to the students. And this might come as a surprise, or maybe not, but most of them simply don't play PC games, nor do they even really care about them. And if they even had the time for gaming, they'd be more likely to do it on an entirely different device. But look, these responses might be a little bit biased. Remember, we're polling final year students and recent graduates here, so their time for gaming is probably at a bare minimum. Overall though, the interest in gaming is probably a whole lot more than what's being shown in these numbers, right? The students who are using these laptops for higher education purposes are not looking at these as an entertainment device. They're looking at these as a tool that will help them sort of build the foundation of their future career. But for those maybe like 25 to 30% of people who actually care about gaming, well, here's some gameplay testing that we did on some popular games. And you might be happy to know that even The 890M IGP can play all of them at high to medium high settings at above 30 frames per second without upscaling. Of course, if you want that extra frame rate uplift right alongside far superior performance in STEM and creative applications, you should be looking for a discrete GPU. I mean, even the 5050 is a quantum leap forward here. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised how well it did against the RTX 5060 and how the RTX 5070 Ti is sometimes almost unbelievably close to that 5080, at least on the G14, which feeds both with about the same amount of power. Now, if you wanted to play something that's a lot more graphically intensive than online shooters, you'll need much more GPU horsepower to hit a bare minimum of 60 frames per second, even at 1200p. Naturally, the IGP just can't keep up with the discrete options here. And if you add ray tracing to that, you need to step up to at least an RTX 5070 for moderately playable frame rates. We have to remember though that enabling something like DLSS is a huge net positive for in-game performance in games that support it, even in its highest quality setting. This is especially true for more entry-level cards like the 5050 and 5060, and with faster GPUs, we're easily able to hit over 100 frames per second with literally all of the bells and whistles turned on here. Indiana Jones is another great example of a game that looks amazing but is incredibly hard to run, with 8GB GPUs like the 5070, 5060, and 5050 getting between just 45 and 55 frames per second in our test. Add ray tracing to that, and in this situation, you'd absolutely need an RTX 5080 or 5090 to get a playable experience. But once again, it's DLSS to the rescue for these laptop GPUs. It even gives people using something like an RTX 5050 a fighting chance to experience this game at almost maxed out details. So if a game doesn't run well on your laptop, just don't give up any hope. Tweaking a few settings could get you a lot better overall experience. And if you thought those responses to our gaming related question were a little bit shocking, get ready to have your mind blown, or at least my mind was blown, because you would think on a portable device like the G14 or any portable device for that matter, there's one thing that would be first and foremost in most people's minds, and that's battery life. Well, it turns out as far as students in these specific courses care, maximizing time away from a charger might not be a huge priority. Other than a few jaunts to a coffee shop or a friend's place, their laptop will generally go back and forth from class to home, where it'll have constant access to a wall plug. It will also run at full speed all the time. So while yes, the portability of something like this is a critical factor for a lot of people, battery life, at least for the people we're talking about here, simply isn't. But then again, the reason to buy any portable device will be the battery life. So yes, I did want to touch a little bit on that. And our browsing load test actually shows just how far situationally aware GPU switching has come, at least on the G14, to the point where the RTX 5050 system gets almost the same time on battery as the integrated graphics setup. Naturally, as you go higher in the discrete GPU stack, time does decrease, but it's still pretty amazing to see these kinds of numbers come from laptops that can put down such good performance in the apps that students use most. ASUS has even gone one step further, and they built in an eco mode into the G14 that completely shuts off the GPU, which essentially brought all of these setups to the battery life potential of the IGP only setup we used. And yet when the GPUs are fully utilized, like in a rendering workload, of course the amount of time you get comes just crashing down. But that's the trade-off, isn't it? Running on battery is fine for quick shots of rendering power, but you'll need to run for a charger in absolutely no time. So look, while the Zephyrus G14s that we're using in this video are focused more on portability than like balls to the wall performance, what this does show is how far laptops have come when it comes to catering to people who want to maximize their performance in the smallest possible form factor. And it's pretty simple, right? The needs of today's students have simply changed from the past. For the most part, those majoring in STEM and creative fields wish they had invested in a more powerful laptop right from the onset. And yet when it comes to recommendations, there are some sweet spots, with the RTX 5070 Ti actually offering a good blend of price to performance in a lot of the laptops where it's used. Basically, it can get close to an RTX 5080 in a lot of the apps we tested, while costing hundreds upon hundreds of dollars less. And its jump up to 12 gigs of memory makes it far more versatile than any of the 8 gig cards. And to bookend this, believe it or not, I also feel the RTX 5050 hits just right. And I know people might love to criticize the desktop variant, but the laptop version's GDDR7 memory interface helps it push numbers in real-world apps that are within spitting distance of a much more expensive RTX 5060. And yet, I think the most important thing to remember is that for most students, a laptop will be a purchase that's expected to last 3 to 4 years, with performance needs typically increasing in every single new semester. So if you can afford a laptop with a higher end GPU right from the get-go, I'd absolutely go for it. And to close all this out, look, I know that what we're doing here is we're simply scratching the surface of all the programs and applications for those programs that are used by students. But maybe this sort of heads us down the rabbit hole and helps us build out our testing methodologies to make them a little bit more relevant for the people who are actually thinking about buying one of these things. But ultimately, what I really hope is this video and others like it will help you guys make the right purchasing decisions. Or don't make any purchasing decision at all, and based on these numbers, maybe your current device is just what you need. Anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope everybody has a great day. Have a good one, guys.